Rise and shine to the working week, Classic fans, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and thank you for joining me here on Countdown to Classic. Today, we'll be hearing an amazing interview with Druid enthusiast and theorycrafter Taladril, who sits down with me to discuss all things Druids in vanilla World of Warcraft. Now, you know the drill by now, people. In my interviews, none of the questions are pre-screened and no favors or payments have been exchanged for an interviewee's appearance. Please do stick around after the interview, as I took a great call from another listener of the show, Swiftdeus, who graciously called in for Calling Countdown this week, and we talked Blizzcon predictions and hunters as well. Now, how about we get straight into it and hear from Taladril first in this great in-depth interview. Enjoy, everyone. Hello and a huge Countdown to Classic welcome to listener of the show and Druid devotee, Taladril. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
So, just to let everyone know how I came across you, I've been asking recently for people who are incredibly knowledgeable about a certain class or spec to shout out to me, as I've been looking to take these interviews towards the class side of things from time to time. And a listener of the show actually forwarded me your name and told me to seek you out over at the fantastic Druid Classic and Theory Crafting by Taladril Discord servers. Luckily, you were happy to come on the show, so I just wanted to say thanks so much for being here today.
It's great to be on. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Now, as we do here on Countdown to Classic during these interviews, let's basically tear through your WoW resume and let people know a bit about you and your experience with the game. So, you ready for this one?
Yep.
Okay. Question number one. With as much specificity as you're comfortable with, where in the world are you from?
I'm from Oregon in the United States.
Very nice. And how long have you played World of Warcraft?
I started out, actually, I don't know exactly the day, but it was one of the last days of the beta. And then I did start day one of retail when it came out.
Ah, very nice. Another beta baby. They're rare, but here you are. Excellent.
Yep.
Now, what was your original main character's name?
Taladril.
There you go. OG. I love it. Now,
Yep.
Dare I even ask, what was that main character's class and race?
Actually, so it was a night elf rogue.
What?
And so I started out as a rogue. Well, I thought they were really fun. That was the first class I tried in beta, and I thought, hey, this is a great class. I'll just take it all the way to 60. But then I switched over to a priest about halfway through Retail Classic and played a dwarf priest, of course, because they're the best, and raided with him mostly.
Right.
So that was sort of my mostly main during vanilla days.
Just a side question. Do you feel kind of dirty for for not starting out with the Druids? Do you feel like a bit of a cheater?
No, it was just, it took a long time to finally figure out where I needed to be, because I played the rogue, and then I played the priest, and then in Wrath, because I didn't actually play TBC at all. In Wrath, I casually played Hunter, and then finally in Kata, I was able to convince my wife to play, so I played a Druid, and I forget what she played, but it was there that I said, oh, this is awesome, I can play every class all within one class right here, so that's what got me hooked.
No, I get it. You went through your angry teenage years as a rogue, and then when you matured and found yourself as a person, you found the way of the Druid.
Exactly. It's the mature class.
I can imagine so. All right. What other classes have you hit a level cap with?
The rogue, and then the priest, and then I guess technically the hunter, but I don't really consider myself much of an expert with the hunter.
And which server did you play on when you started?
I played on Uther. I think it still exists.
Do you prefer to play on PvP or PvE servers?
PvE. I'm a total Care Bear.
That's okay. I used to be that way. I'm trying to change for Classic. Now, what's your highest raid experience?
In vanilla, I got up to about half of AQ, but I didn't really know what I was doing, like most of us. And I did get to see a little bit of Nax, but I didn't kill any bosses in Nax. Well, but in the private server community, I've been pretty hardcore and have gotten through everything except for a KT kill.
You sounded for a second like there might have been a bit more raid experience post vanilla. Did you do much through the expansions?
I did like pretty much pug level of stuff with the hunter in Wrath, but that was about it. It was really minimal.
Okay. Are you currently playing WoW, and where, if so?
Sort of not. The server that I'm on, the old Nost server, is pretty dead, and so there's not a lot going on. Plus, I'm sort of burnt out having done the entire progression with all of it. So at this point, I'm sort of just taking a break for Classic, but I'm going to see with the server merge what the place feels like to see if maybe it'll get me back into it with the population being higher.
Okay, now do you have a quick plug for any places online where people can find you and your work?
Yeah, so hopefully people interested in the Druid would be looking to join the Druid Discord channel. Hopefully you can give a link in your posts, but that would be great because it's a really great spot for a lot of Druid commentary, and there's some good theory crafting going on and a lot of other interesting stuff happening there. So it's getting to be quite a great community.
Absolutely. I will put in a link to the Discord channel that Taladril is referencing there, and I'm sure Taladril, I'll ask you, please do remind me if I happen to forget to do that. But I'll just back up what you're saying there, Taladril, because I've checked in a little bit with that Druid Discord channel that you've been referencing, and a lot of the other classes, they've obviously got Discord servers, and a lot of them are long since dead, but the Druid one really seems quite active. That's the case, isn't it?
Yeah, it is quite active.
Now, okay, final question for you. Complete this sentence so we know where your allegiances lie. For the
Alliance.
All right, excellent. Now, we didn't really cover off on this in that initial resume covering just then, but how much time have you spent playing a Druid?
Quite a bit. I guess I actually didn't mention in the resume part that after stopping playing retail, I did level a Druid to 60 on the Rebirth, which is an older private server, and actually just hit 60 right before they had all their problems and had a major data rollback. And so then this, small little server came around called Nostalrius, and then everybody jumped on that, and I leveled a Druid there as well, and that's the one that I've been maining since. So quite a few days played at this point on that Druid and a lot of experiences as well.
Just to start from the beginning, what is it that truly made you fall in love with the Druid class, like sort of over and over again?
I guess I sort of like quirkier things in the first place, and Druid really fits that pretty well. So a little bit off the mainstream where you have to maybe work a little harder, but you can still do really cool stuff with it. But also I really like healing. I really like tanking, and I also really don't like alts. So that makes it pretty hard because there's not a lot of healing tanking combos in WoW.
And just to get into obviously the minutiae of things a little bit now, we'll start with some softballs. And
sure,
Druid is generally regarded as, if not the least placed class in WoW, at least one of. It's certainly, I think, well regarded as being perhaps in the bottom three.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Do you take pride in being one of the so-called, the few, the proud, so to speak? Or do you wish more and more people would come on over and roll a Druid?
I think it sort of helps the class to a certain extent for it to be a little bit more of an intimate kind of experience in that sense, where there's not a million of them everywhere. It keeps it more interesting and more fresh for the numbers to be lower. That's not saying that I don't want people to play Druid, but I think that the mystique of it helps itself to make it interesting.
Now, Jack of all trades, master of none. What does that phrase mean to you as a Druid?
The Jack of all trades, master of none is a little bit definitely the issue where you can't do all of the same things at the same time, but you can get pretty close to the master of a specific spec if you are spec'd in that. So they're not really considered so bad that they're not useful for anything. Like as a healer, people really undercut their abilities, and I think it's how people build their builds that often they don't really get to shine, and how people treat them in raids, they don't get to shine. So it's sort of as a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes where people look down on them and their capability.
So by that answer, is it fair to say that you probably feel that that phrase, the Jack of all trades, master of none, is a little bit of a fallacy, as Druids can actually potentially master one of the three roles in the game, be it tank, heals, or DPS?
Yes, I would say that that is generally true, but you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle because vanilla, as you know, is a very social game. So it's not always what you think and how you play, but how everybody else is going to treat you and your raid role or party role or whatever else. And, what slot you can find.
Now, what would you say to a player like me who has zero experience playing a Druid, who just presumes that Druid play is, a constant rotation of form shifting and not that appealing for me?
Druid's a tricky one because it has, I don't know if this is true or not, but it feels like it certainly has the most abilities to worry about and the most things to think about when you are doing a day in, day out playstyle, which is especially true for PvP, that you need to truly understand how to play a rogue, how to play a warrior, how to play a healer, how to play a caster, all at the same time. And if you haven't practiced all of those kinds of roles with leveling a character that specializes in that, then there's a lot to learn for a Druid that makes it pretty challenging.
So by the sounds of that, would you actually recommend to people who are considering playing a Druid for the first time to actually go off with another class first, like you did?
Possibly. I think you might not have as much success if you don't have the experience to just jump into it, but that's not to say you can't do it. It's just going to be more catch up, that you're going to have to understand that there's going to be a lot of learning and a lot of optimization that you're going to have to put yourself through to really find the gem of the class.
Still keeping it relatively general, and we will be getting into the nitty-gritty of it very soon, but why is it exactly that some people say, I'm not sure if it's all people, but some people say Druids are not gear dependent? Is that right?
Oh, Druids are hugely gear dependent. People say that warriors are the most gear dependent, but Druids in many ways are even more gear dependent. If you take a tank Druid and you remove just some pieces of armor, he becomes far more squishy. Warriors, as long as you got a shield, heck, that's a good start right there. That's the kind of stuff that it's very important for Druids for having the right gear.
Now, speaking of gear, there's one particular item that seems to come up all the time. Why is the wolf's head helm the height of fashion for any hot young Druid?
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting item for the DPS ferals. It tied with other talents such as Fur and Natural Shapeshifter really can make the feral DPS a lot higher than what it normally is on paper. It allows the feral to be able to shift out of cat form into caster form and then back into cat form. And as long as you have the mana to do it, it's like you get this slow, constant version of adrenaline rush like you get with rogues. So it really boosts the DPS. And I actually did a little test of that to see what the difference is between power shifting, because that's what it's called, and not. And it's like a 40% increase. It's a bunch.
Wow. So still just keeping on this gear track. Now, if listeners aren't aware, another thing that you are very, very experienced and interested in is theory crafting. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in your time with theory crafting and talking about Druid gear, is there anything in particular, an overarching premise that people should keep in mind when gearing up their Druid?
It's going to be really important if you want to see the optimal level of what you can do that gearing up is going to be critical. There are certain pieces of gear that are pretty hard to get. It can be a challenge. Some of them are gated behind PvP content or ranking content. Other ones are just hard to get because they're very sought after raid items. But if you can get it, it's a huge help for sure. Plus, just in terms of if you're trying to maximize your feral DPS, we'll probably get into it more, but you're going to have to plan on farming manual crowd pummelers.
Now, just to finish off in this sort of general section, one of the reasons I personally don't like playing a Druid is that I can't see my gear all the time. Does that bother you?
Yeah, it does a bit, I guess. You get used to it, but yeah, it is sort of sad to not be able to see it. But at the same time, especially for ferals, the gear doesn't look that great. You get used to seeing the gear and thinking, ooh, that's a really good piece. So it's not that you look good, but you know that you are good. And so you get used to seeing that and, thinking of it as that way. But yeah, it's a hodgepodge, just like Fury DPS warriors. They aren't ever going to win a costume contest, that's for sure.
One last question that I think is rather pertinent towards you and your experience being a beta baby. I just wanted to ask, what was the state of Druids? Or you got to see the evolution of Druids throughout vanilla. So what was the state of Druids in patch 1.1 versus how they wound up in patch 1.12?
Yeah, they were one of the worst classes in many ways. Actually, especially the restos. Ferals, I don't know how bad they were. They don't seem like they're terribly bad when I looked at their old talents because, like I said, I actually haven't played the Druid during those points, but I remember seeing them and talking to them. Pre 1.2, I think it was, they didn't have the proper or the higher level of the armor multiplier for bear. So they were horrible for tanking back then. And I can understand why that people would look at Druid and say they can't tank because it was bad. I mean, when you were a level 60 bear, you probably had like 5,000 armor or something. It was not good. So the early Druids, I think feral, maybe not so bad, presuming you get past the 1.2 hurdle, which that can be tricky. How is Blizzard going to roll out the patches? Are they going to do it patch by patch, or is it going to be just a talent thing? Hard to say.
Well, working on the proviso, let's say that in a hypothetical world, Blizzard does choose to simply drop us into a world with patch 1.12 in effect. Now, I can presume, are you going to be rolling Druid again for Classic?
I'm 90% on that. I'm pretty sure, but I'm just dreading doing exactly the same thing that I've done pretty hardcore already.
Okay, let's say and work on the proviso that you're rolling a Druid in Classic again, and for some reason Blizz does decide to do patch progression and starts from patch 1.1 all over again. Would that make you rethink rolling a Druid, or is it just a sorry state of affairs? What would be the story for you personally?
Actually, I would be really curious to see, especially from a feral standpoint, because obviously there's no Moonkin, so Moonkin's out. Nobody's going to be playing that until the revamp. Resto's in a pretty bad spot, but feral's actually not as bad, especially for bears and cats with the gear that we have access to, and the fact that warriors are in a pretty bad state as well. They really, really were bad. It might be that bears could very well become the meta of the main tank, that we could see if that would work. It would take until patch 1.2 for their armor to get that multiplier. But once they're at patch 1.2, then they potentially could have the best threat. They could potentially have quite capable armor because of mitigation, and they could work very well for that role.
Okay, now, as this is a general Druid interview, we'll be covering off on all the specs in detail on other occasions, but I've got a lot of questions for you, just a little bit just scratching the surface of all of those three specs for you. So I just wanted to start with Feral, that obviously we just discussed a little bit. And I know you've just addressed, let's talk about, say, patch 1.12. And I'll start with this question. Is Feral broken as of 1.12, or do people just not know how to do it right?
I don't think it's as broken as people act, especially for bears. The downsides are very much overblown, I think. Cats, it takes a lot of experience. You have to do power shifting to be competitive DPS. If you don't power shift, you are not going to be competitive, and your numbers are going to be really lousy. So if you consider power shifting not part of this whole plan, then yeah, cats are pretty broken. And if they were to get a buff, it would help them out a lot. But I'm sort of no changes in that sense. But no, I think they're pretty good, honestly. They add more to the raids than people want to think, with their utility and with their ability to give a battle res or an innervate, their ability to give their crit aura. All that stuff is really useful.
You've just used that key term of power shifting a few times, and you were kind enough to define it earlier for the listeners of what it is. Now, in terms of feral DPS and power shifting, is it not for the faint of heart? Like, is it basically it's essential, and if you're not doing it, you're doing it wrong? Would that be fair to say?
It is essential if you're trying to do any kind of level of cat DPS, for sure. It takes a lot of skill, or you can also dumb it down too. There are like one button macros you can use that are on that Discord channel that you can take and practice with, but you can also do it manually. The trick is going to be the timing, and in many ways people might like it for a challenge because it's the highest most challenging rotation compared to all the other classes because of what you have to be tracking to make it work.
I know it's hard to speculate, but would you think that for any young druid out there who's thinking about just getting involved with the class for the first time, they might be laughed out of pugs if they're not power shifting?
Oh, this wouldn't be something that you would see for like dungeons or anything like that. I wouldn't bother to do it in dungeons except if I was just for fun trying to push it a little bit. This is going to be for your raids, and you're probably not going to be doing pug raids as much as using a guild slot and just doing what DPS you can.
Now, you mentioned the term. You suggested something earlier about crowd pummelers. What can you tell us about that?
So the manual crowd pummeler is a drop from Nomergon off of the crowd pummeler 960. And the trick of that is that it is sort of a rare item in the sense that it has charges associated with the weapon. There are 3 charges, and what it does is it increases your attack speed by 50% for 30 seconds. So with 3 charges, you can use them back to back, and you can have as many pummelers in your bag as you want or have space for. And so for each one of them, you can get a speed boost for cat or bear that gives you much faster attack speed. So effectively, each pummeler is worth a minute and a half of faster attack speed.
Very nice. And obviously that's something I had no idea about this. It's intriguing to know. And I'm sure that there's plenty of resources online where people can look into that a little bit further. Would that be right?
Yeah, so it's useful for cats. In fact, it is better than a Tiche. If you look at a Tiche, it's got feral attack power. It's better than that for cats. And it is the best option, too, for bears if you're wanting some very strong snap-type threat or just high-threat fights. You can use it as a bear to really generate a lot of threat.
Well, now that you've just raised bears and threat, let's turn towards there a little bit. So I've got a question for you. It's 2:00 in the morning and my guild has gone to sleep. I'm looking for a pug to UBRS and a feral druid says that they'll happily tank the run. Should I go to bed or happily go forward with that run?
Bear tank can tank anything in vanilla, period. It's just about, making sure that the tank knows what they're doing. Tanking is far more about skill than the class, and druids do just fine for any kind of thing. That's actually what I've spent most of my time doing, was just seeing what the druid tank can do. And I've main tanked UBRS multiple times and all the way up through Nax, and druids can do fine. Doesn't matter.
Is there a line of demarcation for you where that needs to end, where druids perhaps can't hold their own as a main tank? Where's the point of no return?
The points to specifically worry about are ones where the fight requires mechanics such as shield wall. If you have that kind of thing needed, or, like let's say maybe Nefarian is not the best option because the druid call is not great. It changes the druid into cat form always. For like Mexina, where there's an enraged and you've got limited time to burn the boss and the tank is very vulnerable, that's another one where you would want the warriors to be tanking. But even if you do that, you could still have a druid be doing tanking or off tanking or whatever else during that kind of a fight. So there's really places where you couldn't utilize a druid in one way or another if you wanted to.
You've just named some of the perhaps worst boss encounters to have a druid as your tank. What are some of the best?
Classic ones you see people saying, like Jindo for Zolgurub. He will hex the tanks specifically, and since a druid is immune to polymorph, they don't get hexed. That actually is the case too for, I think it's Zul'jin, the guy next to Thrall, the world boss. He hexes people. So if you're doing world PvP boss takedowns, the druid is a great tank for that fight. Also for more serious fights, Thaddeus is an ideal druid tank boss because of his buff with the charges. It scales with the mauls and swipes for druids, and that's where we get all of our threat from. So we have a lot of threat capability for that fight, and that fight is very threat specific, so it's a great option for that.
Now that we've heard kind of the best and worst of it, can you think or recall in any way one of the funniest stories that you might have heard people saying about a druid trying to, or not trying to tank, or just a druid tanking a certain instance, and, either something of your own or anecdotal?
There was one time where I've been trying to at least needle this one top level guild to get a feral onto their roster, and they kept saying, no, we're not going to do it. And then they finally opened up they were setting up what's called a gold DKP run for Anchorage. And so I was frequently on that group, and I was always tanking it too. And so I thought it was funny where I was on their pug run for the third hardest or the second top dungeon. And there I was tanking, and they were still saying, no, we're not going to have a druid on the roster. I'm like, I'm here. I'm doing your pug, and things are working great. So what's the problem?
Way to show them. All right. I read something the other day that suggested that a feral bear tank could operate at only at about 75% of the efficiency of a warrior tank. Would you say that figure is about right or quite wrong, and why?
That's a hard number to specify. There's really two aspects of tanking that you need to think about. One of them is how much damage is going to be hitting that tank, and then the other one is how much threat is the tank outputting. So in terms of damage incoming, a druid does take, I did tests about this because I was honestly just sort of sick of people saying they suck. They're this, they're that. And it's like, well, by how much? I don't know. So what I saw was that they were about, between 10 to 35% worse than warriors in terms of how much damage is incoming. The interesting thing for that specific metric is in terms of how hard the druid's getting hit, it wasn't much different. It was a lot more just that the druid has less avoidance. The warriors have parry and we don't have parry. So just that alone is like 10%, boom, right there. So the druid doesn't really get hit too hard. It's more just that they're getting hit more frequently. But to a certain extent, that's actually a really good thing. Healers love it. It helps pad their meters. They can afford it. Like, healing is not a hard thing in vanilla. People really know how to optimize healing nowadays. So the ability to just put those heals out in a raid group is not a problem. So the druid taking that damage isn't a big deal.
Now, if we turn to restoration druids, I was of the belief that Resto Druids were actually quite strong healers. And again, I mean, taking it with a grain of salt because you can read anything online, but I read the other day for the very first time the suggestion that they actually might not be as strong as I had believed, and that perhaps they simply existed in vanilla as an innovate bot. What are your thoughts on that?
Early druids before the talent revamp were not doing well. I had mentioned that earlier. They didn't have a spell reduction speed for healing touch, which is our main healing spell. That got added later, and that's huge. If every single resto didn't have that, that would really suck. So that is a really big negative for the healing druid pre-talent revamp. Post-talent revamp, I think they're totally fine. I see druids topping meters frequently. If they're quality people, they know what they're doing. Usually they're lower. That is true. But, as long as you've got healers that are healing and people aren't dying, I don't see what the big problem is. The big deal for why druids aren't great is because we don't have a fast cast time. So you're not sniping the heals in the raid. If you keep druids generally focused on tank healing, that's really their ideal. They've got slower but very efficient heals. They've got hots to be able to keep the tank up despite, whatever heals are incoming too, and they're quite strong. There's 2 hots even. Plus, druids have the best instantaneous heal in the game with Nature's Swiftness healing touch combo. So all of that tied together, druids, I think, in general are just utilized wrong. Plus, they just don't look good on the meters, but they're still very good healers.
Well, let's say all I want to do is heal in-game. Why should I roll as a druid healer compared to, say, a priest? It
would really depend on what you're wanting to do. Even a druid healer could still do decent solo grinding, for example. You can go into cat form, slap on some cat gear, and you're really not doing badly. So it helps you be able to do stuff outside of raids better. And I think that should be a big key component that people think about is, what is the total game? What kind of stuff do you do? When you're PvPing, what kind of role do you want to play? When you're soloing, what kind of role do you want to play? Druid feels very different from a healer standpoint when you're soloing compared to priests or paladins.
Okay, I just want to read you a quote from the official WoW forums, and I just want you to tell me whether this is true or false. This is a quote from a user named Lagspike, who says the following: "A bad druid innovates himself. A good druid innovates the priests."
Depends on how bad that druid is. If the druid is a really bad healer in the first place, then yeah. But if the druid is topping the meters and they innovate themselves, then they're helping a person that is doing a good job in the first place. I know there's a lot of people that I talk to that only innovate themselves. And you know what? I also see their logs and they know what they're doing, so I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, now, if we just turn a little bit to a final spec, and given what's happened in the news lately, Who's the bigger joke at this point in time? Roseanne Barr or Balanced Druids?
Actually, so this is quite new in the Druid community. We've got some people that have been really poking at the Balanced Druids in terms of theory crafting, and they aren't that bad. Their main issue is generally gear itemization and the ability to manage mana. But even that isn't that bad. There's far worse hybrids than Balanced Druids. And if you've got somebody who's really pushing it, there's logs on private servers. You can actually be sometimes rather frequently top 10 DPS. So it's legitimate. It's not amazing, but it's legitimate.
But what about the joke that they're not boomkins, they're oomkins?
Yeah, so that I think is mostly coming from old vanilla theory crafting that people just didn't really know what they were doing as much. Elemental shamans are far more the oomkin than oomkins ever will be. The testing that was done for the moonkin, they had no problem staying at not having to downrank spells up to the 5-minute mark, which if you look at how fast it takes to kill bosses, that's virtually every boss in the game. So if you can go full tilt for every single boss, you're not really doing that bad.
Is there any way in your mind, and I know you just explained that they're not that bad, but do you feel that some of the issues that people have with the balance spec is pretty easily overcome by a skilled player?
Yeah, for sure. It's all about how much effort you're going to put in, because for any casting class, you have to put in 100% effort, and that means using supreme power flasks all the time, using mana potions like crazy, using demonic runes like crazy, all of that kind of stuff. It is a major effort to be able to put out the maximum like you've got.
Is it true that boomkins or the concept of boomkins didn't really exist or somewhat come into their own until about patch 1.11? And why would that be?
It, I think, was the issue with moonkins as well as feral, that there were so many dramatic changes with the talent revamp, and especially with the moonkin, they didn't even exist before that point, that it took the community a lot longer to sort of warm up to it and to accept it. You know, when something like that just gets introduced into the game and people look at it, and you've got people who are unskilled and they try to do what they're doing and they don't really know what they're doing and they don't have good gearing, it all adds up to not look great when you're compared to like your rogue or your mage or whatever that people have been poking at for, you know, a year or so before that point. So they really know what they're doing.
Okay, well, now that we've kind of touched on all three specs, I just want to change back again to a few other topics. Now, can you address this rumor for me? Is there a kind of unspoken Druish code between fellow Druids on rival factions not to gank each other due to a feeling of brotherhood?
There is a code, it does seem, and I didn't experience it in vanilla, obviously, but you do feel it even on the current servers now. That I think it's just that everybody sees each other early on in Moonglade, and it's such a peaceful zone that it lends itself to that. And so, yeah, the code is that if you see another Druid in the world that's opposite faction, that you aren't supposed to kill them and they aren't supposed to kill you. The Druids just treat each other with this sort of informal peace treaty.
Appreciating that you said you were a little bit of a Care Bear and you like to play on PvE servers, did you go into Battlegrounds every now and again?
Unfortunately, yes, I would say. I wanted to make sure that I had the best gear I could possibly have, and unfortunately for me, that means that I have to get exalted with Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin. And so for both of those, I had to do a lot of PvPing, at least in my mind, to to get to that reputation level for each of those. But it did feel good to have that gear because it's a really nice gear for ferals.
Okay, out of interest, while you were getting exalted with those particular locations, what rank did you get up to in PvP?
I got up to rank 10, I believe.
Okay, so fair to say that, you got the gear, you did the ranking in a little bit of a way. You've got some experience PvPing, obviously. So my question is, outside of acting as the primary flag carriers, were Druids outclassed in every other way in PvP?
Well, I'm not very good at PvP for sure, so it does make it hard for me to say exactly. There are some phenomenal PvPing Druids, though. Like, Druids played well are insanely good at PvP. But, they're obviously extremely good for flag carrying. They've got so many tools to make flag carrying just awesome. But Arathi Basin, it can be pretty rough. Usually it's like the Druid gets stuck watching the I forget which one, the blacksmith or whatever, or whatever the first one is, stables, that's it. And so it's really boring, but you're just sitting there staring and making sure that, that you're not going to get ninja capped by somebody sneaking around the back, because Druid isn't great for front lines. Like, if you're going to have a good healer, you're going to go for a paladin, or if you're going to have a good damage dealer or a CC'er or anything, you're going to use anybody else. Druids just don't really match Arathi Basin very well. Which is rough to get exalted with. You sort of have to play nice to the pre-mades to be able to get that easily. But when you get to Alterac Valley, I mean, it sort of turns into a standard raid. So you can tank, you can heal, you can DPS, whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter.
So from your experiences, would you see many, if any, balance or resto druids in battlegrounds?
Oh, yeah. You see them for sure. Usually it's going to be resto spec. You're going to have some level where you get down to 31 points to get Swift Mend, because it's a fantastic PvP spell. And then usually they will get enough feral points to get feral charge, and then enough points to get Nature's Grasp, and probably improved Nature's Grasp as well. And that's usually the standard PvP spec. So it's mostly resto when you're doing that.
Would it be fair to say that you have carried many a flag?
Yes.
Okay.
I've carried a lot of flags.
Okay. So if people aren't sure about what goes into a druid carrying the flag, can you just tell people what basically to do if you are doing it for the first time?
Yeah. So usually you're going to probably, the usual is to get out of the base, mount up, get all the way to about halfway up the field, dismount. Probably at that point you're going to be going into stealth, or maybe you'll get to cheetah to get a little closer. But once you get up the ramp on the right, you're going to be stealthing for sure. And then you're going to generally go in and go to the middle or the top of the flag room, and just make sure that you're waiting for good timing, make sure that your people are in position to be able to support you. Then you're going to jump down. You're probably going to need to use a free action pod or something like that to make sure that you have clear sailing to get out of the room. Grab the flag, go into bear, try and get out of there without whatever way possible. Often people will use feral charge to try and move up the field by charging somebody that's closer to wherever you're trying to go to make up some ground. Once you get out, then it's usually just either trying to be in bear and follow the group, or be in cheetah and try and get to the group and just make sure that people are supporting you along the way.
Now, just to change off from PvP, what are your thoughts when you hear people, when they talk about Classic, calling for buffs to make Druids more viable when it releases?
I can understand why they want to, but I don't really see the need. I think that if you make them too good, then it makes the role too easy. And like I said earlier, I like to play the off kind of class, and it's more fun to try and force your way upriver rather than just have an obvious class slot handed to you.
Well, I think the easy criticism, and one that I subscribe to when people say things like this, and I'd love to know, it sounds like you might agree, is that if we were to buff Druids and take away that jack of all trades, masters of none, and turn that into master of all trades and jack of none, then why would anyone play anything other than a Druid? Do you somewhat agree with that?
Sort of, yeah. I think that, we know what the meta was in vanilla. We know what it is on private servers, and it's a good meta. Like, there's no reason to modify it too much. And also, the game was totally balanced between everything. It wasn't just raiding. So there was raiding, there was dungeons, there was soloing, and there was PvP, and everything in between. And changing one major thing just to make raiding more possible can totally have different effects for the other aspects too. So it's good to make sure that we don't go too off the deep end with that kind of thing. Druids and paladins especially. If you made paladins have much more DPS, then they'd become PvP god modes, and that's just not appropriate. So we have to be very careful about that kind of thing.
Now, I just want to quote you a little something again that I found online somewhere, and I want to see if you agree with this. Now, I'll just read you the original poster's post, and then I'll read you the responder. So we started off with this, and the original poster said, and they're talking about gloves in chance, and they said, what about gloves in chance with threat? Is plus 2% threat really better for aggro than plus 15 agility? And the responder said, I haven't specifically done a test for it yet. However, I have long-term plans that will address this and give me a solid idea. At that point, we will have a good idea. But if you want a rough back of napkin guess, I'd say that agility will end up at around 0.75 to 1.25% TPS. So then the question will be around 1% threat versus the gain of almost 1% dodge plus some armor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I wrote that.
You did. I'm quoting you back to you.
Yeah. Well, I did do the test on that for warriors actually, and agility came out to about 2/3 of the value of threat. However, obviously the agility also adds dodge. So if you're looking at a total tank value, then agility is definitely better than threat. But technically, threat is better. Now, I think that probably would not be the true for Druids, and I guess let me get into that a little bit because I got sidetracked and didn't really get to explain Druid threat. That Druid threat is very good. It's extremely good. In fact, it's in many ways the best single target threat you can get of any class, period. And so it's because of how the threat works. Our mauls and swipes get a multiplier. So whatever threat we gain from our bear form plus the damage of the spell, there's an additional multiplier of 175% just tacked on to all of that. So anytime you are doing a lot of damage, you're doing even more threat. And so mauls that crit are huge for threat. So agility is very strong for that. So they would be very good for threat gen.
That's a great clarification, and I'm so glad. I was just testing you to see whether you'd be able to recognize your own words being read back to you. So obviously you were all over it. But the reason I read that out to you is I did have a follow-up question, and it's this. My brain melted, not only reading that, but also hearing you just then when you go into the numbers, because I fall apart with number crunching and theory crafting. But you started a whole channel on it. Tell me about your background in theory crafting.
That was something that just came about really weirdly. I was not expecting to be doing that. Honestly, it was this weird progression. I had done all of this tanking and was like, you know what? I think Druids are pretty good. And I kept saying, I think that bears with what they give, they might actually give more DPS than Fury Warriors, because that's the usual contention that Fury Warriors who are tanking do better DPS than Druids when they're not tanking. And I agree with that. But what's the total picture of that? With the aura, with the tank damage with the DPS damage? What is all that? So I was writing this tank guide, and I got to the point where I was saying Druids take X amount of damage more than warriors. And I was sitting there going, I don't know what that number is. So I realized that I needed to test that. And so I found a way to download a PTR that was identical to private server code and just did some very controlled tests on Druids and warriors and paladins, because I figured, well, if I'm going to do it, might as well do it right. And so I just started researching stuff like that and started doing tests and recording it and got the results. And then it just started spiraling more. And I got the idea of making the Discord channel based on the guys who make the Fury DPS Excel sheets. And from that, I thought, oh, I'll make one that's based on my sheets. But it sort of turned into a more generic one that people talk about all kinds of theory crafting stuff.
Getting as specific as you like, and I'm going to give you carte blanche here to go as nuts as you want with the figures and everything. When you talk about that testing that you did, and I find it quite interesting that you, as you say, you downloaded basically what was a PTR and mucked around a little bit there on your own. In all the testing that you've done for your theory crafting, can you think of one or two things that you discovered that people would be quite surprised about that might dispel a few commonly held nitty-gritty theories about Druids?
Yeah, so one of the things that was shocking, well, in general, I'll just preface this by saying Alliance Druids, when it comes to feral, they do a lot better than Horde Druids. Alliance Druids gain nothing from Wind Fury Totem, which is what the DPS on Horde side live for. So that's a huge nerf, and Alliance Druids do gain from Blessing of Kings, which is sort of the equivalent Alliance side. But having said that, what I found was that for tier 1 content, like best in slot Molten Core gear, Druid, for the test I did, took identical damage as Warrior. So they weren't even worse than Warriors when it came to that level of gear. They were the same. And so you get the same damage, but the Druid was consistently always better at threat output. So that makes it where potentially for that level of gear, Druids were best option, period. Also, weird things that I saw was that the best in slot Druid got hit for comparably about the same level as an AQ level Warrior. Tier 3 in Nax is insane for Warriors, so Druids never can compete from a damage mitigation standpoint. But Druids are sort of like a tank in threat gear all the time. That's how you should probably think of them. And they function that way too. Their threat's higher, but they also take more damage. And that's just generally what a Druid is going to feel like to healers, is that they're just in their higher threat kind of gear, not their full mitigation set.
Okay, so I'm going to muck up this question somehow, but recently on the show, I'm not sure if you heard, I interviewed a listener, Tarocco, who came on the show to explain the ins and outs of tanking in quite great detail. Now, he raised the point, and I'm sure you've alluded to it as well through the interview and just then as well, the concept of, and you did say this, there are different types of tanks, but he went into obviously more warrior tanks in terms of, you've got your threat per second kind of tank, and also your damage mitigation kind of tank. And I'm probably mucking that up in some way, but please go back and listen to that interview, people, if you want to know what I'm talking about. But in terms of Druids, just to wrap up on that tanking issue, is there those different forms, and again, I think you said it earlier, of approaching gear and encounters?
Yeah, every tank is going to have different gear sets depending on what they're running. That's a given. It's necessary. You need your resist sets. You need some different levels of threat. You might have different levels of armor or avoidance, all that kind of stuff. In general, I've been saying that Druids should be looked at as like your third tank kind of spot. They are an off tank in general. You can bring them in as a flexible main tank for high threat type fights like Thaddeus or potentially Patchwork or even Veil. But in general, they can just be on the tank roster doing generally tanky stuff, picking up the trash packs, doing whatever is needed for bosses. And when they're not needed as tanks, then they go to cat. And from this testing that I did, that actually does provide more raid DPS than a prot or a fury or any other tank in that role. That is the optimal DPS addition to your raid to do that.
Just turning quickly to the concept of leveling, just as we wrap up here. Now, if someone is leveling as a druid for the first time, is it basically feral and nothing else, or is balance a consideration as well?
You can do anything you want. I leveled a holy priest from 1 to 60. But if you want to do the smart thing...
You like pain.
Yeah, I do. But if you want to do the smart thing, you level feral, because it is definitely the fastest. And it's one of the fastest because there's no downtime. You go to cat, you do damage, you kill the mobs. When you get low on health, you switch out, you heal yourself, and you go right back to cat, because your mana will regen as you are in cat form. So yeah, you don't have to drink, you don't have to stop, you just keep going.
So if someone is leveling as a good little feral druid, as they should perhaps, are there any particular pieces of gear that you look for through the leveling experience that perhaps are a little bit off the beaten track that you would recommend to people?
No, nothing necessary. It would just be important. Start early. It's never too early to start getting your healing set and your tanking set at the same time. You can have your tanking set, which is pretty much your DPS set as well, just agility or strength and stamina gear, all leather, of course. And then a healing set, you're going to be looking at just int/spirit gear. And even as feral, you can heal dungeons, no problem. You can tank dungeons, no problem. It doesn't matter. You can do it.
Okay, well, you just used the term all leather, which is also, funnily enough, the catch cry of the BDSM community. So what I'm going to ask is, you hear that pallies, obviously go down to wearing cloth and they get the jokes that they're skirt wearers, blah, blah, blah. Do druids have that end game at all, or is it really all leather, or is there some cloth mixed in there?
Oh, for healing, for sure. Leather or cloth is definitely what you should look at. The paladin and druid gear list is pretty similar for healing. It's mostly just go for whatever has the most plus healing most often. But yeah, when I said all leather, I was meaning specifically for the DPSing and the tanking, because you need that armor, that base armor on the leather gear to make it worthwhile to be a good tank.
Got it. Okay. Now that we touch on raiding a little bit, just to finish up here. Now, raiding as a druid, is it resto or bust? Or is it not true that having just leveled as an awesome cat or an awesome bear or a rotund woodland creature, I'll now be relegated to being a heal bot? Will I be laughed out of a guild if I say, look, I just want to be a tank, or I just want a DPS?
The easy path is definitely be a healer. It's possible to be able to do cat or bear. There's plenty of guilds that are willing to let you be on that roster. I'm hoping that with the kind of research I did and with other druid experiences, that people are going to be more and more willing to look at bears to be a part of official main rosters. I think that there is a spot for that on any level, including hardcore ones, if the person is doing full level of work to make sure that that role works. Cat, it'll be the hardest probably if you're going to be a pure cat, because they have the biggest hurdle, or a moonkin too, to try and find that slot. But there is slots that will be available. If you're looking for being fully hardcore, you're probably going to have a hard time finding a really high quality guild that will take a non-resto. But in general, you'll find a spot somewhere.
Okay, one last question from me as we wrap up this interview. How many druids do you think should be in a raid? And you're not allowed to say 40.
Well, for Onyxia, of course 40. But I think people commonly say 2 restos. I think 2 or 3. I wouldn't have just 1. That's a real big strain for 1 to be doing all the buffing and to make sure that everything's up and going. I think Druids are plenty good healers. There's plenty of space for 2 or 3. I wouldn't have more than 3, I don't think, because it does start to overlap a bit. And I think 1 feral. I think you should have 1 feral on your raid as an off tank. I think that's optimal.
Okay. Well, I won't put you on the spot then after that answer and ask you how many druids it takes to change a light bulb, but maybe we'll do that another day. Okay, Taladril, well, that's all my questions for the day in this in-depth interview. But what we do here on Countdown to Classic now is we've had actually members of the Countdown Council listening into this recording. And I believe one of the listeners now will have a question for you. So I'll throw now to listener and council member Tsunami, who has a question for you. So Tsunami, go for it.
So in regards to power shifting, I have a scenario that I often get stuck in. I just power shifted and then shredded to a 5 combo point, and I'm at 0 energy. Do I power shift to Ferocious Bite, or do I let the energy regen naturally?
That's a great question. It is definitely, that's a very detailed aspect of power shifting. I believe the right answer would be to wait and burn that Ferocious Bite because it's a pretty cheap from an energy cost. The ideal is to look at power shifting as a way to get more shreds in, and you wouldn't want to waste an entire power shift just to be able to burn through a Ferocious Bite. Additionally, just to add on to that, we've figured out that you definitely do not want to ever use Ferocious Bite at 4 combo points. You always want to wait to 5 regardless of circumstances. So you want to, your ideal is to shred and then get to 5 combo points, then Ferocious Bite. And ideally you're wanting to put your power shifts around the shreds.
Okay, that was a great question, Tsunami. I've actually got a follow-up just from your answer there, Taladril. You said never ever use Ferocious Bite at 4 combo points. Why is that?
It just is not efficient from a damage standpoint. And I even did a test to prove it too on the PTR. It's just that the combination of how it works out with the bonuses that you get from the combo points and just energy usage, that shred is really your go-to, and Ferocious Bite is just a nice added filler, especially because it's far cheaper energy-wise.
Okay, well, that's all the heavy questions for the day. We're going to lighten the mood a little bit, or perhaps we're going to anger up the mood a little bit, because now it's time for anger management. Each interview, I ask the interviewee to hit me with some of their angriest thoughts about World of Warcraft. So, Taladril, I want you to bring the anger, bring the heat. What makes you angry about World of Warcraft?
All right, I have 2. One is really quick. Okay, guys, on the private servers, it's anathema, not anathema, okay? It's very easy to say. Everybody gets it wrong. It drives me crazy. Okay? Secondly, okay, when a druid is a tank, they are not the brown square, they're the orange square, and they do need heals. And it's not the druid's tank when they die, when they're not getting any heals from the healers who aren't watching Group 2 or Group 3, and the orange guy getting hit on by every single boss in the entire raid.
All right, thanks for that, Taladril, and getting that off your chest. I hope you feel better. But with all that done, now it's time to put you on the hot seat. Each episode, I ask the interviewee about a dozen fun questions, some hypotheticals about World of Warcraft. So, Taladril, are you ready for this?
Yep.
All right. Now, question number 1. What's the last thing a druid should ever announce to their pug?
To their pug?
Yeah.
That they are spec'd in a way that they aren't expecting when they are in the raid, or say to heal or to tank, and it's like, wait, I'm not that spec, or even better, I don't have that gear on me.
Okay, next question. So, a druid, a rogue, and a warlock walk into a bar. Who gets the girl and why?
I'm going to have to go with the druid on that one.
All right.
They are... They're the proverbial nice guy, but not in a creepy sense. And they can take any form the girl would ever want.
Ah, very, very good. Thinking outside the box. All right. Next, you're familiar with the game Fuck, Marry, Kill, I presume?
Yep.
All right. You know how we do it here. Fuck, marry, kill, Taladril. I'm going to give you 3 things. Boomkins, feral tanks, and power-shifting feral DPSs.
I'm going to have to go with marry feral tanks, kill power-shifting DPSers, and screw the balanced druids because their dance is so sexy.
Very good. Excellent. A surprise answer there. Okay, next up. Who is the most obnoxious druid NPC in the game?
It's got to be Archdruid Vandrel Staghelm. Just his quote text when he talks to you, he's always so mean and rude. I just can't handle that guy.
Oh, it's the reason I asked the question is so many of the druid NPCs are so unbearable to me with like how high and mighty they get. We get it. Protect the wild, for fuck's sake.
For sure, yeah.
Okay, next question. So the language filters are off and you cannot be banned for this. So what's the one thing you've always wanted to scream at someone who talks shit about druids in-game?
That druids are way better than people give credit for, and that that we just need to not have such an elitist outlook on classes like that.
Okay, next, what's the meanest thing that you've ever done in the game?
I, in Rebirth, was leveling in the Barrens, again, as Alliance, remember? And there was one guy doing that really annoying escort quest from south of Ratchet in that one stronghold with that Blood Elf guy. And the Blood Elf guy is yellow. Obviously, I can't attack the Horde, but I was just coming out of Ratchet and I saw that he was just about to finish that quest. He was probably 5 seconds away from done, and I attacked that NPC and killed him. And so he failed that quest at the 11th hour, and he was so pissed off.
Okay. Do you have a proudest in-game moment?
Oh, yeah. Way back in vanilla, when obviously nobody knew anything, I was with a couple of guildies, and we were doing the Marshal escort quest for Onyxia attunement, and we didn't know what we were doing, so we just started the quest. And of course, normally you would clear that entire ring, but we didn't. So we started the quest, and he started walking, and there were mobs the entire way, and it was just the most insane fight that we had. We were not even 6th for some of us. We were probably like 58 or something like that, and it was just this constant, insane fight after fight. There was no downtime for probably like 45 minutes or something like that. We all died at least once. We had some corpse camping that we'd come back, we'd res ourselves and get back into it, and it was insane. It was just so exciting to be able to get it, and we succeeded at the end without knowing what we'd done, and it was like, wow, we actually made that. It was quite the group to be able to be a part of.
Do you have a most embarrassing in-game moment?
Early on in Nost, when I was learning about all the details of private servers, I was learning to do the Dire Maul buffs. And so I joined a pre-cleared Dire Maul to get my buffs for a raid. And I don't know what I was doing that day, but I died 3 times in a pre-cleared instance. I don't even know. It was just ridiculous. I died. One of them was I got to it, I looked inside the tribute chest, and I didn't click on the guy to give me the actual buff. And so I just ran back and, I aggroed a mob and died right there. And I'm just sitting there going, what in the heck am I doing? I finally got the buffs, but it took way too long to finish that.
Okay. What was the moment outside of the first 5 minutes in the game that you realized that you were going to be a druid for life?
Obviously I was playing it in Kata. It was just when I was able to do healing, and then, with the dual spec, which I actually don't agree with. I don't want dual spec in vanilla, but with the dual spec being able to just switch from healing to tanking, I was like, oh man, this is so awesome to be able to do whatever role I want to do. What suits my fancy. Just like this. This is so cool. Why didn't I do this class a long time ago?
Maybe that should be the motto of the Druid Discord channel. Whatever suits your fancy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, last question. Tell me why you, Taladril, are most excited for World of Warcraft Classic.
Well, I would just say, I think everybody has pretty much said it, just the ability to relive it again and to really have it be that experience. I got that experience with the Nostalrius one, so if I don't get that personal feeling, it wouldn't be that bad because I already sort of feel like I got that, but to have it official, to have it on the official servers, that'd be pretty nice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
All right, Taladril, you made it through everything unscathed. You've done everything so well, so please do plug your stuff again. Tell everyone who's listening where they can find you online.
All right, yeah. Hopefully anybody who's interested in being or learning about being a druid comes to the Druid Classic Discord channel. There's a lot to talk about, and we got a great community going on over there. It's really worth checking out.
And just for everyone's information, I can't sort of back that up enough. I have poked my head into the Discord channels that Taladril runs, and they are very active and they're incredibly informative. So if everything Druidism does pique your interest, and theory crafting in general, please do go and check out those Discord channels. I will put links in the show notes. So just go and have a little look-see and see if there's anything there that floats your boat, and feel free to say hi to Taladril. So Taladril, thank you so much again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Josh. I really enjoyed it.
Hey everyone, it's me again, and that's that segment of the show done. And big thanks again to Taladril for taking the time out for that interview. And if you enjoyed that interview, then you'll be pleased to know that Taladril will likely be back on the show sometime further down the road to discuss theory crafting and feral druids in depth on another occasion. I just also want to thank Graal over at Reddit, who kindly put me on to Taladril and his work when I was asking for interviewees for the show. So thank you so much for that, Graal. If you know of anyone who would like to be interviewed on the show and would provide amazing insight into a particular topic, then please feel free to forward on suggestions to feedback@countdowntoclassic.com, and I'll try my best to get in touch with them. But with that interview done, now it's time for Calling Countdown. Okay, we've got a caller on the line today, and who have we got, and where in the world are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Swiftdeus, and I'm from Alberta, Canada.
You contacted me and said that you had a few things that you wanted to hit on, and one of the first topics that I wanted to discuss with you, Swiftdeus, was a topic that I haven't hit much on the show yet, and I was going to wait till a little bit later, but I'm more than happy to discuss now, is that of BlizzCon 2018.
Yeah, no, the tickets were insanely hard to get, and it's hard to support a company that has deviated so far from where we wanted it to be. But we're hoping that we get one of those classic announcements, and I would love to be there for that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the tickets were insanely hard to get, and I went through the trials and tribulations of trying to get one, and unfortunately I got shot down at multiple junctures, but with the good graces of some fellow listeners of the show, I was able to finally secure one, so that was great. Did you manage to get one?
Yeah, no, we got 10. So
wow.
The first day, yeah, it was brutal. The first day we tried and they sold out within a second. We were all just refreshing our browsers and nothing there. We tried on the Saturday. I think they had more out. And with 10,000 people already having tickets, we had a better chance. And yeah, we secured our tickets.
It's been one of those things that, like, you know, events like this or concerts, like, I have never in my life been one of those people that just gets a ticket when I log on, you know, on the minute that it goes on sale. And all these people that get them, I'm like, how the fuck did you do that? It's insane.
Yeah, no, it was, you know, and it's not about just getting the tickets. You got to pre-plan, you know, from a buying your Airbnb or your hotel suite. Like, I know that the hotels went up a lot this year. The Marriott was at $750 a night.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah.
We secured Airbnb just a mile away for $200 a night, but that's split between 10 people, so it's not too bad. But yeah, it was incredible.
I thought about going the Airbnb route, but what I actually wound up doing, and full disclosure for all you Countdown fans, I am staying at the Hilton while I'm there, and that was not cheap in any way. I think it came out to be almost $500 a night. And the reason I did that was more out of necessity, actually. I would have loved to have stayed somewhere else, but A, it's good to be close to the convention, and also B, because I'm sort of going to be, quote unquote, working the convention. I'm bringing all my audio equipment from Australia with me over there, and I'm going to be trying to interview as many people as possible, and I just figured it would be so much easier for me if I met someone at BlizzCon to be able to say, hey, would you do an interview with me? I'm just next door, as opposed to, hey, do you want to catch a cab 10 minutes down the road with me with this random Australian and like do an interview?
Absolutely. As a person who's actually stayed at both the Hilton and the Marriott, the Hilton's a fantastic hotel that's right on site there. But did you manage to secure a suite above the 4th floor?
I don't know. I'm at the whims of the random hotel room distribution gods, so I haven't found out yet.
They got in the upstairs patio, man. That's where they've got security in all the stairwells. If you can secure something above the 4th floor, you can absolutely get there. That's where all the big guys like Mike Morheim hang out. Absolutely.
Knowing my luck, my room will be somewhere in the basement next to the trash compactor, and I will maybe get to use a bathroom stall 30 minutes after Mike Morheim, and that's about all I can hope for.
Well, you can always meet him in the elevator. That's where I met him the first time.
All right. I'll just ride the elevator up and down all day. Now, one thing I should ask you is, do you believe, as some people do, like me, that this will actually turn into a little bit of a de facto classic con?
Absolutely. My buddy and I always talk about this at work, and when we're out, we were talking about how, you know, what does Blizzard really have to bring to the table this year round from a StarCraft perspective? You know, they kind of just rided this one out. We've got Diablo 3. When they say we've got the expansion there, do we add a second expansion? Diablo 4 is probably not in the works. Heroes of the Storm, you always add a new character. Same with Overwatch. Hearthstone, new expansion, obviously. But it's interesting because with a Warcraft perspective, we've just released Battle for Azeroth. What can you bring to the table? So either this is going to be a completely boring BlizzCon and we waste all our money going down, or they're going to have something. And between, you know, the big lulls and patches between BFA and maybe a classic thing, maybe classic can actually work itself in there.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think if you really break this down, and you did just such a great job then of really just analyzing what the possibilities could be. But if you really, really put this thing under the microscope, you think about, well, let's start with this one. Blizzard doesn't have to do BlizzCon. They have skipped a year in the past. So if they've got nothing, that's right, isn't it? They've skipped a year.
Yeah, they did. They absolutely did. And I believe between so it'd be 2012 that they skipped it.
That's right. So if they had nothing of note to talk about, or at least not enough, they would simply cancel or not hold a 2-day convention devoted to their properties. But obviously, if you've got enough to talk about, then you hold the convention. So as you do, we go, okay, we know we're getting 2 full days of stuff here. What do they really have to talk about? And when you do break it down game by game like you did, you go, well, they're really, unless they're coming completely out of left field with some new stuff, like let's say, something huge like a new game, a new property, or a new expansion that's been unannounced for another game, there's really not that much to discuss. So when you strip all that down, we're kind of left with Classic. And to be honest, if I had to give tell me what you think of this, if I had to give my predictions, I don't think I keep saying how about number one? I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're going to get I think we're going to get a couple of panels on Classic. And secondly, I think, as a lot of people do, we're going to get Warcraft 3 remastered.
Warcraft 3 remastered would be awesome. Just from a StarCraft 2 perspective, the UI is better, the collision's better, all those sort of things. I know the hardcores aren't going to particularly like doing that update, but we've absolutely seen in the past year, just recently, that they updated Warcraft 3. They did a whole bunch of balance changes, so who knows on that front. On the other side, we got BFA. BFA is going to be really big, but we already know the content that's going to be coming out in 7.1. So unless they're going to tell us the second raid before we know our first raid, which is kind of a spoiler, then we were going to go a route of saying, here's what we're going to be doing in, the Kultaris or the Zindalari. But at the same time, we say, by the way, we threw it out to you guys last year. We're doing a little bit of Classic. Let's have like a Q&A panel. Let's discuss. And more so, if they are going to do any changes, they're going to have those changes in front of people before they have the Q&A to make sure they have it right, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, look, breaking it down from a business perspective and from a corporate perspective, as I like to do on the show, if we're really getting in the minds of the Blizzard marketing team or the executives on how they want to present this to the fans, I think if they're going to be discussing Classic on at least a mid-tier level, as I believe, it's going to be something that I think comes more towards the start of the convention than the end, because it's got to be a day one thing. If they waited, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but could you imagine if it was like the last panel of the second day where they just did all right, everyone, thanks for coming. Oh, wait, yeah, you thought that was the end of it. Well, here's Classic. And it was literally like the last hour of the convention. I think people would riot. Because you'd have very, very unhappy campers for 95% of your convention.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. As much as they want to give all the big information up front, it's not like they gave us that much information last year. They sort of threw us a bone. We had the big Nostralis petition that was going on. They threw us the bone, and then that was it. And they went to the Q&A, and they basically refused to answer questions. They said, we're too early in development to really know. So maybe they toss it in at the very end, and they say, look, guys, there was just not that much, but we're still developing Classic. And then we're sort of like rioting a bit, but there's a lot of other stuff at the convention. As long as they don't throw us something crazy like, by the way, we're going to start on patch 1.13, which is BFA for Classic, and you're welcome. It gets kind of ridiculous.
No, I totally appreciate where you're coming from in that that's what they did last year. And I do agree, like, I'm not advocating for people to be flipping cars outside the Anaheim Convention Center. When I say riot, I obviously say that tongue in cheek. But what I mean is I actually think I'm slightly against you on your point, because I feel that there is a difference between last year's convention and this year's convention, because last year we had no idea anything was coming. The announcement was the announcement that was completely out of left field. So with no expectations, it was actually a smart decision from their marketing team to go, hey, do Classic basically last. And I think it was pretty much the last thing on the second day last year, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. I tuned in, but as soon as we all saw the trailer for Classic, I think we just watched it about 20 times and then lost whether it was the first day or the second day.
I might be way off, and please, listeners, do correct me if I'm off on this one. I thought it was towards the end of the convention when they did it. Now, knowing that, they're basically allowed to, it's smart, drop the mic, walk off stage, let people lose their fucking minds as they go home. However, this convention is quite different in that we're coming into it with the knowledge that this product is coming, and a lot of fans have made this pilgrimage to Mecca for this information, and I'm sure Blizzard is quite aware of that. So if they were, hypothetically speaking, to go through the full first day and not say boo about Classic, I think it would just... And again, I won't use that word riot. Obviously, I'm joking, but I think it would make people very, very unsettled and grumpy that first night and go into the second day a little bit like, oh, what's going on here? And just to finish up on this point, basically what you set yourself up for then is... Yeah, okay, it would be in vogue with what Blizzard has been doing. They've been making us wait with no news. That's fine. What's one more day? And I'm on the team that's been like, guys, just chill out. We'll get news when they've got it. Stop going nuts saying that, they're the worst company in the world for not telling us what's happening with the development of their game. They're entitled to keep us in the dark. So I appreciate that aspect of things. I think it's a different ball game, however, when you hold a convention for 30,000 people, when they pay a high price for tickets to hear your news about specific products, and then you drop this bomb last year and we come with the expectation this year, and then you basically don't talk about it until the end. I think it's burying the lead. But I appreciate that some people might not feel that way.
I feel like the biggest problem that they have at BlizzCon is when it comes to the Q&A, it's, and I don't want to discredit anyone, and a lot of people have different interests in what their questions are, but I feel like a lot of the questions are pretty, I don't want to say dumb, but dumb. A lot of the questions are like softballs that are thrown into their court that they can just rebound. Hey, are there going to be new mounts? Is my water starter going to be, able to walk on water? How is BFA going to go? Where I'd love to see a lot of people, when it comes to this Q&A, just mash them over and over. We're talking 30,000 people on a convention over, 5 different auditoriums. You get those people that take 30 questions. If the majority of those people were talking about Classic, I think that would send a sign to them that people are willing to pay for this sort of thing.
Are you telling me that I should put away my question for Mike Morhaime about what he had for breakfast?
Absolutely. In fact, what he had for breakfast is probably the same thing that he's been having for breakfast for the last 20 years.
It probably is. He's a robot and he's amazing. But look, BlizzCon will be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. And absolutely, you have to please stay in touch with me. I'd love to have a beer with you at the convention. So we'll stay in touch and try and meet up. I want to meet up with as many Countdown fans as I can at the convention. And obviously, whilst I will be working, I'll very much so be partying as well. And you haven't drunk until you've drunk with an Australian podcast host, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. It'd be a pleasure.
Okay. Now, moving on, I would love to sit here and discuss, honestly, BlizzCon for the next hour. And perhaps what I'll do is, I'll tell you what, how about we do an interview sometime in the coming months, Swiftdeus, about how we expect BlizzCon to go? Because it sounds like you and I, it's not quite the echo chamber, which is great, and we might disagree on a couple of things, and we can talk about how we expect the convention to go, maybe sort of day by day.
For sure.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned to me that you're a little bit of a hunter veteran. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any particular hopes and dreams for hunters going into Classic? Now, I'm not sure if your changes or no changes and not really going down that path so much, but is there anything that you're expecting of people coming into, or the hunter crowd, so to speak, going into Classic?
There's a lot of things that happen between patch 1.1 and 1.2 12 that affect hunters in the sense, not so much the talents, because obviously I think the 1.12 talents are they're the finished product of an expansion. But I think the main things are, a lot of hunters are interested in pets. What pets are going to be your best pet? There are things like gear itemization where it says, hey, is this piece of gear going to be upgraded early or is it not? Hunters overall are very good early patches, but in the later patches they sort of fall off. So it's all over the board. I would hope to see hunters do reasonably well, like they generally do, until 1.6. The only thing that is for me that I think is going to be too bad is that we're just not going to make it there in Nax, and I think it's too bad that from a change no change perspective, I don't want to go down that road. That maybe we want to get the more balance. At the same time, please cut this out, absolutely, because I'm ranting. But my problem with overall is that, do we all need to fight for this Lupos pet in Darkshore, which is a shadow damage pet early on, and everyone hates it because you have an 8-hour spawn time, or we have a dynamic respawns, which case it's going to be available to all hunters, and therefore everyone will have the same pet. It gets weird.
Well, I'm glad you raised Lupos, because I had having never played a hunter, I had no idea about, who or what the deal was with Lupos. And obviously since starting the show, I've had a couple of people mention this, when they talk about hunters, and just going and thinking about what you just said, I never realized, obviously with it being the best pet for hunters, so to speak, is it something that gets camped, and is there a bit of a war zone where it spawns?
Absolutely. Knowing full well on multiple private servers that it's, if the server gives it the shadow damage, that they generally have to put back into the code, because by 1.12 it is taken out. Depending on the respawn rate or the multiple spawn locations, it is heavily guarded between both the Alliance and the Horde faction. Some people just want to come mess with hunters. Other people want to, tame one for their alt. And it's one of those things where if you are trying to make a race to 60, it's a very important item. It's better than anything you could possibly equip.
So with Lupos, is it really night and day between the number 1 and the number 2 pet in the game? If I, say, got fed up and said, fuck this, there's too many people around, I'm not going to get Lupos. What's the number 2? Is there a number 2 clear-cut best pet?
There are, but they're generally not in the same game. It's a completely different ballpark. You have generally a wolf that has Fierce Howl, and that's about as good as it gets. It depends if they code in. There's some polar bear up in Winter Spring that's elite that is more common, but it did fire damage early on. Generally, the private servers don't worry about that one, and especially for things like multiple core, with such high fire resist, it just doesn't have the same effect. Whereas with Lupos, you got shadow resist that's being reduced, and you've got a few of the buffs that come from the other classes that you can snag. And if I know it's not from a teammate perspective, but as a hunter, as any class, you always try to look as good as you can. I would say that, the Blood Axe Warg and Lobers is probably your solid second bet.
Now, one thing that I've been leveling a hunter very, very sort of briefly recently, and just, again, mucking around on that journey from, 1 to 12, really, just having a bit of fun. The one thing that I was reminded of that I hadn't thought of in quite some time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is the one thing that keeps me away from hunters a little bit is not being able to manage, or not knowing how to manage that, dead zone. What's the term again between where you're the range where you're out of melee?
Yeah, it's absolutely called the dead zone. It's the range in between your melee attack, which is a 5-yard range, and your range attacks, which are 7-yard range.
Right. So that's something that really gave me the shits in terms of enemies closing in and things like that. And just, how do you deal with the dead zone? And what would you say to prospective young hunters that they should know going into playing in Hunter with regard to the dead zone?
Use a 2-hand weapon and absolutely raptor strike him and wing clip him until he wants to run out of that range, and then you can back up. But really the only people that we have issues with that too much are the mages that can actually lock us out in between the zones. Most of the other classes are fine.
Okie dokie. Now, is there a particular spec of Hunter that you're quite familiar with, or that you always find yourself going towards?
Both of the specs there's two specs really for at least these classic servers, I should say, private servers. The first one would be a Beast Mastery leveling spec. You're going to have a hard time. Otherwise, your pet's just not going to have enough damage, especially if you're leveling solo. The armor, the health, the damage that it puts out is really good. And it provides a good buffer. If you ever need to say, hey, I'm in a bad situation, you sort of sacrifice the pet and you already gain 20 yards on your enemies as you're trying to get out of that zone. But once you get into the rating seed, you're generally going 20-31, which has your pet, especially with a Lupos, dealing a lot of the damage, and then you being able to get that true shot at the end. But that's a pretty standard spec. I know back in the day, a lot of people have thought of this survival spec, especially with the hit, the sure-footed. It's just not really needed at the patch that we're at. It is a DPS loss, but you take it as it is. You let people play the way they want to play. It's not supposed to be cookie cutter.
All right. And when you play Classic, are you going to roll Beast Mastery or something else?
Well, you do for leveling, obviously, Beast Mastery. It all depends. It gets so complicated with where they're going to go with the patches. If they go early on, obviously, there's different specs that you can go. But if it's the 1.12, you level Beast Mastery with the 31-20, and then as soon as you're ready to raid, you switch it to the 20-31.
Okie dokie. Well, look, we might have to get you back for a Hunter-focused interview as well, because obviously every class, every spec on Countdown to Classic is going to have their time in the sun. And not only will there be a general Hunter hour-long interview, there's also going to be all of the specs covered as well. So we'll have to stay in touch, and I'll get you back for a Hunter one as well.
Sounds good. I guess if not, then we'll see you in November.
Absolutely. All right, mate.
You're going to be the best dressed.
I hope so. Yeah, now everyone's got these expectations. I'm going to have to wear the 3-piece suit or something to Blizzcon.
Absolutely.
All right, dude. Look, thanks so much for calling the show, and we'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that's been Calling Countdown, everyone, and that's the show for the day. But just before you go, I've got some shout-outs and show news to go through, so stick around. I just quickly want to thank the Countdown Council members, Borzen, Palfuris, Seven Winters, Tsunami, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Without your support, the show simply would not be the same, and I thank you so much. And also a huge thank you to supporters Myrtlebanks and Rarebit. Thank you as always. While we're shouting people out, it's been a while since I got Geographic on the show. And how about I send some love to Countdown listeners in the Czech Republic and Belgium. A bit of Euro love on the show. Thank you so much to listeners from those parts of the world for checking in with Countdown to Classic. Stateside, how about a big shout out to the following locations: H-Town, St. Pete, and OKC. What up, party people? Thank you so much. I can see the downloads pouring in from those locations, and I love you for it. I spent a week in Houston once, actually, and I have a lot of love for you all there particularly. As for the rest of this week on Countdown to Classic, well, you can expect a forum show and a lore episode. I'm not sure which will be Wednesday and which will be Friday. Likely the forums will be on Wednesday, but we'll see how I go at work. Either way, the forum show this week will cover off on whether or not Vanilla WoW truly is harder than retail, whether new players should consider jumping into the game with Classic or retail, and then we'll touch on Fury Warriors. As for lore, This week we'll be touching on the dragon aspects, which could turn into a bit of a long one, but you may be getting used to that with Countdown to Classic, as our average episode length has slowly started to cross that 100-minute mark. But none of you are complaining, so until I hear otherwise, everything is all good as far as I know. But for now, that's everything, folks. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and continuing to support Countdown to Classic. We hit very close to 30,000 downloads just last month alone. And I hope for the show to grow even further from here. So I hope everyone is telling a friend about how much fun you're all having listening along to Countdown. See you all with the next episode on Wednesday. And until then, have a great start to the week, everyone. See you later.